Systems thinking. What is systems thinking? Systems thinking is a holistic problem solving framework that views problems as part of a larger dynamic whole. Keep that in your head. It is a holistic problem solving framework that views problems as part of a larger dynamic whole. Today, we are talking about Fawn and Keith Weaver, who were the owners, the heads of Uncle Nearest Distillery here in Shelbyville, Tennessee. When I say here, I'm actually in Nashville, but Shelbyville is about 40 minutes away. So it's a suburb of Nashville. Uncle Nearest, for those who don't know, is a distillery that grew by massive proportions over the last 4 or 5 years. They also are the owners, or were the owners, or I think they're still the owners actually, of Humble Baron, which is the largest bar in the world. And they have another restaurant on that property called Barrel House, which is more of a barbecue restaurant. Both of those restaurants are now facing eviction procedures because Keith Weaver, who is named as the owner of Barrel House as well as Humble Baron, has apparently not paid the lease on those properties for a year. And so currently that's in eviction procedures. Miss Weaver, Fawn Weaver, was removed as the CEO of Uncle Nearest, and Keith Weaver removed as the COO of Uncle Nearest amid over a year of legal troubles stemming largely from unpaid debt from Farm Bureau credit, where they owed over $108 million and were not paying that debt. After it went into a receivership, then there were too many troubles that they had in working with the Weavers in trying to resolve the debt. There was some implications of untruths on the part of Fawn Weaver, and they have, again, effective June 1st, been removed as heads of the company. Y'all, how do we get here? I am Dawn Marie Morris. Before we go further, I'm the Chief Training Officer of the World Class Training Institute. This is the Leaders Lounge. This is a place where leaders can come for all of their leadership goodness. This particular subject has kind of been all over the Nashville and Tennessee news because it's a sad story. It's a shocking story. And as a leader, I had to talk about it because there are too many leadership faux pas that seem to be at play that we have to think about, and we can glean from this situation. That's what the focus of this Leaders Lounge is. It's on, as a leader, thinking about their role as heads of the company and understanding that they have to think as a system when they are making decisions or not making decisions, making moves or not making moves, because you are affecting a larger dynamic whole. And I've been a part of a company. I was a part of MCI back in the days, and we thought everything was great. Came to find out there was massive fraud that happened. The stock that was doing extremely well went down to penny stock. They had a massive, of course, severance with all of us as employees of the company because of the size of the number of people who were affected by that. It became some kind of I guess, which kind of benefited us a little bit. The severance was larger than it, I guess, regularly would have been, because so many employees were affected by what happened then. So I am a part of an organization where the leaders in that particular case, and I believe the person, Bernie Evers, recently passed a few years ago, but he spent several years behind bars as a result of what happened. Why? Because apparently there were some, I'm going to call it just selfish motives at play. And as a result, I think they, in their case, they overvalued the stock, and it was found that there was some fraud that happened. And again, many employees, hundreds of employees were impacted by that. In fact, that's still stories you still see occasionally on Facebook. So as a leader of an organization, and as a leader who was impacted by an organization that was very reputable, that ended up again seeing its demise because of leaders who did not think about, because I'm saying they did not think about the employees in their movements. This particular story just reverberated with me, because I have been one who has been negatively impacted by leadership, blindsided because they did not operate the business in a way that allowed it to stay solvent and for us to remain as employees. So let's talk about this thing related to Mr. and Mrs. Weaver, Fawn and Keith Weaver, who again have been removed as the heads of Uncle Nearest Distillery, Humble Baron, and Barrel House. So for those people who don't know, just to give a little background on what happened with the organization, the distillery, run out of Shelbyville, Tennessee, I believe it was in 2025, faced a court-ordered injunction where they were placed under receivership. What does receivership mean? Receivership means that as the heads of the company, they were no longer allowed to run the operational pieces of that organization. Because Fawn Weaver had built such a brand recognition attached to her face, likeness, and image, she was allowed to remain the face of the brand, but she was not allowed to handle any of the transactions. As the receiver, she was also given a gag order, which meant that she was not supposed to talk about any of the things going on. Just as a leader in that particular situation, I believe she did herself a bit of a disservice by continuing to show up on Instagram. I think that she should have just kind of taken a total backseat, gone into whatever state, the state that she apparently is in now, where she's completely off of social media, and regrouped. Because again, when you're thinking about a system that you're impacting, it's more than about you as the leader. It's about all of the employees, all of the people who, frankly, just are common folk who are rooting for you. It's about maintaining the reputation of that organization. And sometimes the best way you can do that is to stay silent. So under the receivership, again, there was a gag order. She was told not to speak. She didn't go into a lot of detail, but she wasn't very quiet. She even did some sales, which, hey, clear the shelves. And there were some speaking engagements that she was a part of. I did not hear necessarily that she was speaking about any of the terms. So I don't believe that she was going against what the gag order allowed or disallowed her to do. But again, I just am a believer that when you're going in for a fight, sometimes you need to just take a step back, regroup, which means that you go quiet. Step away is one of the chapters in my first book. Step away so you can step forward. So again, that was the receivership. So after there was further investigation into Uncle Nearest, the CFO was someone who was removed from the company initially, and Keith and Fawn Weaver apparently are now filing a lawsuit against that person. And then going further into the investigation into the company, it was found that there were some areas where Fawn Weaver made some moves that made her look like she was operating in an improprietary way. And the example that I'm going to give is that there was an infusion of money from Jay-Z into to help her. I believe it was $20 million. That money was put into this company, Grant Sydney, that she has versus going, but she did eventually, I think she moved it from Uncle Nearest to Grant Sydney, and then in increments moved it back to Uncle Nearest. Now, not being a banker, I'm not sure why that was seen as something that they didn't like, because eventually the money did apparently come back to Uncle Nearest. But there was, that movement was something that the courts did not like. There were some other instances where they believed that Fawn Weaver's answers were not truthful, and that also did not place her in a positive light with the courts. So June 1st of this year, they ended up removing them as CEO and COO, largely because, as they stated, they believed that by doing that, they would be able to move in a way that allowed them to take over the company and help it to remain solvent. So now let's talk about this in terms of the systems portions that were not handled well, and what they led to, or how they led to what happened with Uncle Nearest. So the first thing that I just mentioned was it going into a receivership. So I looked up for myself. I was like, okay, let me see how companies, how they were formed, and then what causes companies to be lost if you're the founder and the head of the company. And so what it said was that the first thing that can happen is if you are not handling your debts properly, even though you're the founder of the company and Uncle Nearest is set up as an incorporated organization, the courts can come in to make sure that these debts are paid. So what happens from a system standpoint is now you're under strict policy enforcement. So now when I first read about the 108 million, I went and looked like, what happened here? Apparently Farm Credit was contacting Fawn Weaver and her constituents a number of times to get resolution and payment on this debt, and they were not able to get the debt satisfied. And so what happened was it had to go under a receivership because the debt was in default. So as a leader of the organization, especially the way it was perceived that this organization was doing so well, I'm not sure why this debt was not paid. But because of that, when you're talking about some of the repercussions of not thinking as a system, you find yourself in strict policy enforcement. And you can't be mad at the organization that has to come in and enact the regulatory I'm going to say the regulatory measure. You have to look at yourself and say, where was the area where I did not dot my I's and cross my T's? And I always love the Oprah method that, hey, she didn't care how big her company got. She was signing her own checks. As the head of Uncle Nearest, it was Fawn Weaver and or Keith Weaver's responsibility to make sure that these debts were paid. So even if you have a CFO, you need to inspect what you expect if you are running that company, because at the end of the day, that lies with you. You are the one that is going to be held liable or not when judgment day comes. So by not staying on top of this, it led to this receivership. So what's the message for leaders? Leaders, when you are running your organizations, if you have delegated responsibilities to certain people, it does not mean that you take your hands completely off. It means that you have frequent conversations about what the expectations are, and then you inspect what you expect so that this does not happen. So that's the first thing in terms of the system breakdown. The second thing that I want to talk about is what's called an escalation. So when normal business operations are running, then there's no rush, there's no push for things to have to happen now. An escalation occurs when typically there is something that has not been handled well, and now it's gone up to another level, or the time frame has been pushed back or down. I don't know how you want to say it, but you have to handle it in a more in a time frame that may be more quickly than you might have originally agreed. So for instance, when money is due and you are not maintaining your regular payments, if they give you a year to pay it and now you have missed a payment or two, people can ask for that money immediately. So it's been escalated because you haven't handled it in the time frame according to the agreement. The Uncle Nearest situation not only called for the loan to be paid, but also it was escalated to another level. So the time frame became now, and it went to another level where now the courts are handling it. As leaders, again, it is our responsibility to make sure that we are taking care of the business through regular review of the performance, regular review of what we're expecting, holding people accountable in the right way so that escalations do not occur. And avoidance is the best way to get an escalation. And so in this particular situation, from what I read, they tried to communicate with the Uncle Nearest team, their leadership. They were not getting the responses that they had that they needed in order to resolve this, and it became something that escalated. Don't know why. Unnecessary. And again, as someone who should be thinking about the system, not individually, because you have all of these team members under your stead, you are stewards of them. You have got to make sure that you do what you can to prevent escalations. And it can be uncomfortable. It can be uncomfortable. Sometimes if you're running into situations that you don't necessarily know how to handle, or situations where you're running into financial difficulties, it can be uncomfortable to have that conversation with a creditor, but it's better to have that conversation than not, because typically they can work through whatever those challenges are. It's the same thing when you're in an organization. Some people may not be doing things exactly the way you want them to, or in the way that the standard operating procedures suggest should happen. It is your responsibility to have the conversation with the people responsible for carrying the work out, because if you don't, then what you're thinking is, oh, that wasn't done right this time, I'll just fix it. Or, oh, it wasn't done right, but it's okay, so I'll just let it go, can become something that leads to an escalation. So you've got to make sure that you have the difficult conversations that you need to have as leaders. Third thing, systems failures lead to is goal erosion. What's goal erosion? Well, it's just that. You've set a goal for the company, you've set a goal for your team, but if the system breaks down, likely the goal either is not reached at all, or the goal is eroded so that either you're forced to lower the bar or you are forced to accept something different than originally desired. So, which for some of that could be one and the same, but but goal erosion is a direct result of the lack of systems thinking. So how does this relate to Uncle Nearest? Well, Uncle Nearest was on pace to be one of the largest whiskey brands in America. In the African American community, I believe that Fawn Weaver and Keith Weaver's Uncle Nearest was seen as one of the most prolific spirits brands of our recent day, surpassing Ciroc and some of these other brands in that community. The second thing is Fawn Weaver had always talked about legacy for the Green family, helping them with college, helping them to succeed beyond her life through what she had done with Uncle Nearest. Now, with her losing control, she has negatively impacted perhaps that legacy being carried forward. So the goal that she originally had to make this something that would go from, that would be carried out in the Green family is now at risk. And then by not cooperating with the court system, working through this, because perhaps with I think her name was Miss Edie, who was the nearest Green descendant, who she often used to show. By not handling this well with the court system, then they may be less likely to even work with her to ensure that that legacy that she wanted to have carried out is still in place. And so we have to really be thinking as leaders, and that's why I preach servant leadership so often, because if you are a servant leader, one of the things I talk about in my book, Unpacking Agape, the 7 Languages of Intentional Leadership, is that you are a steward of the ship, which means that those people, that ship is placed in your care. So when you're thinking about how you are handling problems, you have to think beyond yourself, beyond your feelings. You have to look at the data and let the data be greater than your emotions. And those 3 areas, I believe, were created by, in whole or in part, by Fawn and Keith Weaver not thinking about Uncle Nearest and the big system that was being created and making moves that kept the system as a whole. When I teach systems thinking, I always ask for the org chart first, because I like to really get people to look at that chart, the lines that are attached to all of the different people in that chart, and get present to the fact that the reason those lines are created from one to the next is because we are all one whole, and the whole cannot be greater than the sum of the individual parts. So the individual parts have got to operate in concert, inter and intra dependently so that the system as a whole can thrive. So, as this title of this is, it's the weave that was woven, that was avoidable in this instance, because I haven't heard anything yet that said that the weavers weren't generating enough revenue, or that the weavers were in a position that they have been unfairly brought to task. Of course, the story is still being written, and we may find something like that out. But even as this was starting, I remember Fawn Weaver posting on Instagram the numbers across the states for how well Uncle Nearest was selling. So short of that, I don't see where there was a financial reason that this system has dissipated in the way that it has. And so what I just want to caution all leaders, and I know it's hard, I've been doing it. I don't have a big organization, but for anything, any client that I service, any intern or contractor who works with me, I am deeply rooted in ensuring that I show up in a way to them where they know that they can trust me as their leader, they can trust me as their vendor, they can trust me as a partner in whatever portion of business we are operating. That is job one of us as heads of companies, as heads of departments, as heads of any organization. So make sure that as you are operating your organization, that you are thinking about it and thinking about the decisions that you're making from the standpoint of, I'm me, and yes, there are certain things that I want or I may desire, but I am a part of a system, and I must think about how I approach this concern, this challenge, this opportunity from a holistic framework that views whatever is in front of me as a part of a larger dynamic whole. And if you take that more macro view before making decisions in a micro way, then typically the result is going to be better. I wish the weavers nothing but the best. Just like Steve Jobs was ousted as CEO and came back to run Apple and run it in a big way, the same thing can happen here. And I wish that for them. I hope that, as they say, in life, we get lessons. And if we learn from our lessons, then typically we come out and we're even better on the other side. And I heard Fawn Weaver say something. She may not even remember, a few years ago, she and her husband did a talk at the National Museum of African American Music here in Nashville. And I was so impressed with them. The talk was a part of a series they had called Bosses You Should Know. And what she said always stuck with me. And she said, when she's faced with challenges, she always remembers that if good is the end of the matter, if it's not good, then it's not the end of the matter. And so I take those words back to them, and I hope that they work towards good being at the end of this matter. Until next time, remember that at the World Class Training Institute and at the Leaders Lounge, when you are better, we are absolutely better. Take care.